My name is Phoenix Smith, and I am going to be doing my presentation on how Capcom contributed to the gaming culture that we have today. First of all, a context and history. Capcom was developed in the late 1970s in Japan. It was founded by Kenzo Tsushi. Fuck's sake. I always fuck up on the last name. Sorry, Charlie. I need to restart, sorry. How. Sorry. I've had to restart like 5 fucking times. Yeah, yeah, thank you. Okay. My name is Phoenix Smith, and I am doing my presentation on how Capcom contributed to the gaming culture that we have today. First of all, a context and brief history. Capcom was starting out in the 1970s, specifically 1979, in Japan. It was founded by Kenzo Sugimoto. Originally, it started out as a company developing video game consoles and arcade games such as Little League and Fever Chance, which became relatively popular in Asia and America. After 1983, Capcom very quickly became the leading company in most arcade games, reaching from just being within Asia to a global scale. As of now, Capcom is most known for puzzle solving um and deep, meaningful themes such as death, grief, and social injustice. Um, the most notable titles are franchises such as Street Fighter, Monster Hunter, and Resident Evil. Each franchise has extensive, interweaving character stories that can be found across each game within their respective universes. The biggest example of this is Albert Wesker from the Resident Evil series. He is mentioned in most of, if not all, the Resident Evil games. For example, in Resident Evil 7, you defeat the main villain by using Wesker's gun, which is just titled the Albert. This solidifies who he is and what his major role within the story will be. My main focus for this presentation will be the Resident Evil series, the horror action linear exploration series. Aesthetics and awareness. Resident Evil's art style is semi-gothic and holds quite an unsaturated color palette. It's most commonly been described as dark, atmospheric, and grotesque, which is extremely evident from the character models from enemies such as the Nemesis, Resident Evil 1's Tyrant, and Salvatore Moreau, one of the villains from Resident Evil 8. And environments such as Castle Dimitrescu and House Beneviento give off this dark, gothic, atmospheric feel. I believe that the reason the developers may use such grotesque imagery is to feed into the brain's natural fear of the unknown. It is a natural fear that most humans, if not all, are born with, which is something that is quite handy for game developers and film developers to use within the horror genre. Multiple games have attempted to replicate the style of Resident Evil, which for some games have been a great success. This is evident with The Last of Us, Silent Hill, and The Evil Within. So, as you can see, I have some examples here of what I think are really strong things about, specifically the Nemesis' design. So, the Nemesis is the main antagonist of Resident Evil 3. I think its strongest aspects are its shape and its form. As you can see, its silhouette is very recognizable. If I were to black out that image and show it to someone, they would probably be able to tell me that it's the Nemesis. Which I think is really good. The progression in the game is presented with the fluctuation of its form. As you can see, the second Nemesis fight up in the right side, That's like its second fight, and then beneath it is, its final form. Both of which still carry that very grotesque feeling that I mentioned just before. Um, it it's just downright creepy, which I think fits really well for horror games. Next up, Castle Dimitrescu. Um, Although I don't think we know what it was actually based off of, it does solidify the game's setting in Midwestern Europe, as the architecture of the castle itself does represent a lot of castles from like the middle of Germany and France, that would have shown up around the 15th century. Where the exterior itself features a lot of medieval architectural elements like steeply pitched roofs, ornate gargoyles, and dark stone walls. The inside of the castle itself um represents quite a like Victorian era Germany. Obviously in Germany it probably wouldn't have been called the Victorian era. However, I'm going to use that for sake of simplicity. Um Now you may be wondering, why does this matter geographically, right? And um this is because the Resident Evil series does make it very clear in each game where it is meant to be set. Meaning to stay true to the information given, they have to design their assets and environments to match this. As you can see down in the right-hand corner, um, the image I've shown is the New York City Police Department, specifically the 240 Center Street location. This was used to potentially inspire Raccoon City's police department, which in of itself features a tower in the center, like the New York City Police Department does as well. I feel as though Capcom handles this pretty well. The architecture makes sense. It doesn't feel choppy. It bleeds into itself quite perfectly, and I think that it blends into the surroundings amazingly as well. Next up, the Resident Evil franchise is a PEGI 18 franchise in most countries due to its strong language and graphic visuals. As you can see there, the Nemesis has quite a torn up, sort of like Scarface sort of thing, to where he has been completely blinded to enhance other senses that he may need to possess. Most scenes in the franchise treat the violence and gore as a crucial part of it rather than glorifying it, opposing methods seen in other video games with similar themes. The violence in the series is a core aspect and a representation of Umbrella Corp's pharmaceutical abuse, meaning it's not a subject that the developers can simply avoid. There will always need to be some form of violence or graphic imagery because they're showing the mutation of the human body, and that can get very nasty. I think that the environment designers did a fantastic job with the areas previously mentioned, and I personally am quite biased to Castle Dimitrescu, as I have a love for Gothic architecture, and it feels nice to have to see in games buildings and areas be based off of real places, because it really feels like they're trying to draw in the immersion for the players. And additionally, I think that the character designs also stay true to the game genre and aesthetics, which make models eye-catching and incredibly iconic. It's a very strong asset of the franchise, and I think that it's one of the things that Resident Evil does the best. Its audience and target demographic is quite a debated subject. The rating for the series averages at PEGI 18, obviously, as I mentioned, due to persistent violence and explicit language. A huge reason for this is because of the continuous gimmick of shooting the undead, a lot of the times in the head, to defeat and take them down. Now, I think in some countries this isn't the case, but in countries such as Germany and Japan, any sort of showing of blood instantly gets you brought up to a PEGI 18. For the reason of they just don't want kids to be able to access it. They don't want kids to get freaked out by, the graphic imagery that they're seeing on the screen. Um, Very early on in the franchise, it's very clear that the demographic is for stereotypical straight male audiences. As you can see on the right hand side, that's Ada Wong's Resident Evil 4 dress in the original. It's a really unfortunate stereotype, and for the reasons of she's described in the games as a Chinese spy, and I think the patterning on the dress maybe was not needed. The design of the dress itself looks like it's meant to be more sexy than practical. Um, it's a very unfortunate thing, and it is a pattern that still happens in games right now, just not as commonly. It's the pattern of sexualization of Asian women in the 90s and early 2000s. And as I said, it still happens now. It doesn't make it any better, but it does still happen. As you can see, they have kind of fixed the problem in the Resident Evil 4 remake, where Ada's most iconic outfit comes from, the sweater dress. I really like it because it looks practical, it also looks comfortable. She's got the harnesses to be able to, hold more things, and I think that is a fairly good design. Um, as I said, there's been a massive change in attitude that Capcom has had to this. It has honestly been probably one of the better changes that they've made to their series. Capcom hasn't always been the best with handling this like diversity in like races and country culture differences. Now, this isn't just Capcom that is guilty of this. Multiple other game developers would have done this in the early 2000s. It's just unfortunate that, Ada, being the character she is, was sexualized, as I believe it's completely unnecessary. You can, as I showed in the remake, they give her a completely remastered outfit, and that has become the more iconic outfit. And it's very clear that Capcom is trying to show this personality within Ada that isn't just, sexy woman that's there for the sake of it. She's there because she has a job to do, because she is a part of this narrative story. Now, there's another controversy when it comes to Capcom and their issues with race representation, and that is the controversy with Resident Evil 5. Now, this game takes place 11 years after the destruction of Raccoon City. It takes place in 2009. It follows Chris Redfield and Shiva Olimar while they're trying to intercept a bioorganic weapon in Africa. Throughout the game, you fight these people called the Granados, which was the name adapted from Resident Evil 4. However, it depicts native African people in quite a barbaric and disgusting way, and it has gotten Capcom in quite a bit of trouble in the past, to which this leads people to believe that Resident Evil 5 will never get a remake, or if they do, they would have to completely redo it. But it's another example as to why Capcom hasn't always been great. It's one of those things that they have kind of fixed, due to the fact to where they've kind of avoided using racial stereotypes for characters and for enemies. So I think that is quite well handled. Now, each game has its up and down, but the community has always had quite a vocal stance in the online space. And Resident Evil 2, being one of the most well-received games, has been said to had offered a lot of replayability, and it has been described as one of the most demanded games in the series. This is a similar case with Resident Evil 4, the remake's version specifically. It was received incredibly well and has been said to be the pinnacle of the series. And this is backed up by the fact that it sold more than 12 million copies worldwide, which is absolutely amazing. It's one of the games that contributes to the Resident Evil series' most sold games. And after Resident Evil 4, the original Resident Evil 4, the games started taking kind of a decline. Like I mentioned, Resident Evil 5, people weren't too happy with that game, and a lot of people think that Resident Evil 6 isn't really worth mentioning either because of just how boring and bland it seems. However, when people started to get this doubt in Capcom, they came in with Resident Evil Biohazard, also known as Resident Evil 7. It was described as the scariest game in the series, and it has not defected from its creepiness and intensity since its release. Since horror games aren't well received in Japan, Capcom resorts to focusing on character narratives to market in Japan, whilst pushing the horror aspect in America and Europe. Now, narratively, what people would look for is a well-written protagonist and antagonist. So not a protagonist that's absolutely perfect, he has no flaws, perfect-looking guy. The protagonist must have flaws. They've got to be a little bit dense sometimes. And antagonists, they can't just be this edgy being. There's got to be a reason they're doing what they're doing. Which means that somebody that is looking to get into the Resident Evil series for narrative reasons could benefit from looking at the Japanese promotional stuff rather than the marketing for Europe and America. I think it works quite well to look into I think it works really well looking at the demographics, like what genres work well in what nations. I think it can be a flawed system, because obviously there will be people who prefer the art over the narrative, or the narrative over the art. Or like how well the game plays, and that's completely fine. But the problem that Capcom had was that when Resident Evil Village was in development, marketing was stunted quite a bit because of the pandemic. So, an interesting thing that the developers did was they created an ARG, which is an alternate reality game, or an augmented reality game, titled The Merchant's Quest, and it was created to leave hints and clues about the characters and the game itself. Another way that Capcom tends to market their games and show them off is to play them in PlayStation Showcase, which I think might be a yearly thing. I'm not incredibly sure. But it does allow them to reach a larger and more diverse audience, and it will also fit the bill for who they're marketing to, because it's gamers. They're going to be watching to see what new and upcoming games are coming, and if there's any that would appeal to them. In conclusion, Capcom is an extensive development studio with the numbers and the reviews to back it up. And although they've faced controversy and errors of games that were poorly received, as of present, they seem to have changed the way that they do things, and to an extent it has brought them some of their best games in the Resident Evil series. They've recovered from the backlash and the problems that RE5 and 6 brought them, taking on criticisms and reviews to enhance player and viewer experiences. This is why I have chosen to study Capcom and the Resident Evil franchise over my AAA contract.